Star Wars has really not been doing that great in the Disney era. The recent movie trilogy is an abhorrent, disgusting mess, and the only previously available game, Battlefront 2, also released as an abhorrent, disgusting mess of pay-to-win loot box garbage. Luckily, Respawn was somehow able to save itself from deletion with the success of Apex Legends. A deletion that would have been caused because EA released Titanfall 2 a week after Battlefield 1. Somehow, the stars aligned, and Respawn was given the freedom to make Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, a strictly single-player game with no paid DLC. I mean, if you had told me that EA, of all companies, would be the one releasing what used to be considered a normal video game experience in the current year, I would have never believed you. So outside of that, is this game actually worth playing? It's a Souls-like game set in the Star Wars universe between the prequels and original trilogy, and it also has Uncharted-like platforming. Honestly, the game's not something I expected from a Star Wars game, but subverting expectations seems to be the new hotness in this universe. So does Jedi Fallen Order rise above the clouds or crash into the swamps of Dagobah? Let's talk about it. So going into it, I was very apprehensive about this style of game since I thought it would clash with the power fantasy of being a Jedi. One of my favorite aspects of the prequel trilogy is how calm, cool, and collected the Jedi are as they slice through any and all adversaries. Which on a side note always made me kind of not get the whole Order 66 scene, like they get overpowered by just a few stormtroopers when they've been taking down hundreds of droids, no problem. Well, anyway, Souls-like games are not known for making you feel that way. Quite the opposite, actually. I mean, literally any enemy can murder you quickly and painfully. I mean, these types of games are usually tense and psychologically horrifying experiences. It's a fine line, but Fallen Order does a decently good job at walking it. Standard stormtroopers and creatures are pretty easy to wipe out, but if they appear in packs, they can take you down if you're not careful. Larger creatures and some of the more elite Empire forces also can pose some real threats by themselves, especially the first few times you encounter them. That said, they usually have a limited moveset that's real easy to learn and exploit. This kind of causes a difficulty curve that spikes and valleys quite often, but it fits the theme of both the story and the genre, which is a Jedi regaining his powers and connection to the Force. Speaking of being a Jedi, you have a number of Force powers at your disposal. Cal can push and pull enemies as well as slow them down. You can throw your lightsaber for ranged attacks too. Overall, I liked the dynamic way these abilities changed the combat, but the game did kind of prove to be a little finicky when you tried to use some of the Force powers. I never felt like I had full control, especially when Force pushing enemies. Sometimes they'd go flying, other times they'd stagger, and other times that nothing would even happen. I don't know if it was just the abilities were made too precise. Maybe they could have been helped by a little more aim assist or something like that. But in general, the Force powers are a nice addition to the game, and they can make encounters, especially boss fights, a lot more manageable. Now, speaking of boss fights, they are unfortunately a low point of the game for me. Usually, the highlights of the Souls games are boss fights, but here they feel very generic and uninspired. They usually just stand there blocking your attacks until they jump away to begin an elaborately animated attack where they will throw something at you or charge toward you, and you have to dodge away from it. This is especially frustrating because sometimes you're fighting literal Sith, other Force users with lightsabers. Like, why can't we have an epic, awesome lightsaber fight? It felt like such a wasted opportunity. Similarly, the monster boss fights, also pretty bland, with slow, telegraphed attacks or short, completely uninterruptible flurries of aggression. And this, really more than anything, bothered me about the game. The combat is set up to be heavily reliant on the player parrying enemy attacks and then coming in for a quick counterattack. But then there's also a number of enemies who are completely unaffected when you do parry their attacks. I felt trained to parry and then counterattack, but then, oh, nope, this enemy or boss is going to keep attacking you, so now you're attacking him because you just parried his attack, but he's still attacking you, and you get hit, and he, of course, because it's a Souls game, takes out half your health in a single hit. That is not a cool, interesting way to challenge the player. Speaking of challenge, unlike most Souls games, this one actually has difficulty settings. You no longer have to get good if you don't want to. But even this doesn't always work in the game's favor. I played on the second highest difficulty, but usually found it too easy. Yes, there were a few bosses that killed me a number of times, and some encounters with groups of enemies that gave me some trouble. But really, I didn't die that much during my time with the game. Now you might be thinking like, oh, Captain Sarge, why didn't you just up the difficulty? That's because the highest difficulty is unfairly difficult. It is such an insane jump that I couldn't be bothered to subject myself to it. The highest difficulty narrows your window for parrying so severely that it feels unfair, especially because the engineers and designers of this game seem to have mistaken this constant and unstoppable enemy aggression as fair, rewarding, and challenging difficulty. To me, the most difficult setting was clearly not the one that the game was designed to be played on, but instead a challenge presented to the most diehard fans of the genre. Now, on top of these problems that I did have with the combat, the platform and exploration in the game also left me a lot to be desired. This is a personal thing. I have never been a fan of the, what I'm going to call, Uncharted style of platforming. To me, all that happens when you add a ton of walls to shimmy across and jump between is you slow down the movement speed of the player, and then of course there's those enraging moments where you jump but your character doesn't grab the ledge or just jumps off in the totally wrong direction for no reason. It's tedious to me, I've never enjoyed it, so if you like that kind of platforming, this game does it just as well as other games in similar genres. It's just personally not for me. That said, the worlds that you explore in this game are great. They're unique, with varied climates and styles. It just wasn't fun for me to actually explore them because of the platforming that they set up in the game. There's also some Metroidvania qualities to the game too, with certain areas on the planets you visit being blocked off because you haven't gotten the required force skills yet, and you can come back to them at any time through your spaceship. But I never felt any urge to go back and 100% this game, because most of the things that you unlock are visual changes that you can make to your lightsaber, or to the costume that Cal wears, or the paint jobs of the droid and his spaceship. Personally, most of these are just recolors, and the lightsaber changes, it's fun to customize your lightsaber until you realize that he's holding it in his hand and you never actually see it through the entire time you're playing the game. So I didn't care to unlock every possible option. Again, if you're into customization, if you're into collecting, this game has a lot more for you to do after you beat the main quest, but it's just not something I'm interested in. I don't necessarily hold that against the game, I'm just saying I wasn't that interested in it. Visually, the game looks great. The planets, like I said, are beautiful, diverse. The characters also look pretty good on the whole. That said, I did run into a lot of stutter and slowdown on my PC. And this is even after I set things below the recommended settings, recommended by both the game and my NVIDIA GeForce experience. So just be aware that disabling the Windows game bar actually helped with performance, but it didn't totally fix all of my issues. So that was another thing that really annoyed me. There was a lot of stuttering, especially when first loading into a new area. The game would really chug for a while, and that led to me getting hit by some enemies that I shouldn't have, and the game just kind of freezing up on me randomly. I have to say, this game really is saved by being a Star Wars game. The music just feels so great. It fits right in with the scores from the films. And there's just something about playing a Jedi in a video game. The story is relatively simple. You're trying to find other Force users so that you can rebuild the Jedi Order. It takes some predictable twists and turns, but honestly, it's Shakespeare when you compare it to the narratives of the latest trilogy of films. So as far as what we've been getting from Star Wars, this is the best story that you're going to get. It's not anything phenomenal, but it's way better than Episode 8 and 9 and Solo and all those movies. The developers are truly fans of this series, and you can just feel it coming out of every single aspect of the game. And that really does a lot for it. I loved the game for that side of it as a fan of the movies, as a fan of Star Wars. This is definitely a good addition to the Star Wars franchise and games. And they just did such a great job with nailing the feel of Star Wars. And I really can't overstate that enough. If you're looking for a Star Wars game, this is the game for you. Personally, I think the game is far from perfect, especially when you compare it to the kings of the genre that it found itself in. But I wanted to play it through. I loved the Star Wars side of it. The main story took me about 16 hours, but I did leave a lot of the optional exploration undone. There's also a New Game Plus, so if you really are into 100%ing games and playing through them again, you could definitely get a solid chunk of time out of this game. Ultimately, though, I'm going to have to give Jedi Fallen Order a 3 out of 5, and I think it's a great game to grab on sale. Get it for $20 or $30. Even if you're not a fan of Souls games, though, I do recommend this one. I think everybody can enjoy this game. It's much more casual than the standard Souls experience, especially with the ability to change difficulties. So what do you guys think? Do you love this game? Do you hate it? Where does it rank for you among Souls games and Star Wars games? Let me know in the comments below. Be sure to like the video, hit the subscribe button, it helps out the channel. Follow me on Twitter, follow me on Twitch where you can watch me play these games, and I'll see you guys next time.